schools, I think the principals and staff of those schools have to get on board. This community has worked hard. There are 20 kids there. There's room for double that number. So not just encouragement, but the community outreach done by this particular community centre to the schools has to be increased from the schools, not from the community. Moving on to the food programme. Our food programme is an absolutely essential element. As principals and vice principals, 20 years ago, we looked at what's happening across the board in the States. We looked at Head Start, and we saw the programme, a universal programme. Not a programme that has become a fee for service right now, where you charge $60 for everybody, and I know parents who can't afford it are not asked at this particular time. But this absolutely must be a program for everybody, not just a program where you charge some and not others. To be successful, that program was in operation, has been, and hopefully will continue. But I deplore the fact that we have now, the board is forced, underlined forced, to charge for a lunch program, a hot lunch program for kids in the needy, one of the neediest or some of the neediest areas in this city and this province. Moving on from that to community outreach, I look here at the list. When I say programs, community outreach, services and support has been cut for community outreach in inner city schools, and right down to all other programs. This list here I have in front of me, by the way. This is a list that's 3 years out of date. It's an appendix to the Vancouver School Board budget of 3 years ago. There are 26 cuts to elementary and secondary education. Then I go down the other side. If I add on the other list at board levels, there are over 50 cuts. That's 3 years ago. And this is a board that now is facing a deficit, I guess, of $8 million come September. Some of the cuts that hit hardest are the kids with special needs. Kids who need learning assistance, kids with attention deficit disorder, or kids who have fetal alcohol syndrome. And I've spoken to some parents before this panel started about that. The support isn't there. The cuts to special needs over the last decade have been devastating. They're unfair and they're unacceptable. Lastly, I think what's on the horizon is optimism as far as I'm concerned. The board's suggestion that it would have a First Nations school. I think that, from my perspective, should be a K-12 school. We're righting an historical wrong. It's a personal opinion. And if it's done properly and the time is taken, and most importantly, it comes from the community, from the bottom up, not from the top down, I think that will be a successful program. We have examples in adjoining provinces, Alberta, Saskatchewan. The models are there. The model that should be adapted for here will be a special adaptation to the needs of urban First Nations children and families in Vancouver. I underline urban. And I realize that has to be handled in a sensitive and caring manner. Lastly, I want to mention about Apple BC, of which Scott and I are members, and which we've been standing up for or pushing public education over the last, defending public education over the last 6 months. What we've learned from, I guess, the inspiring, emotional, and heartrending public consultation process that the Vancouver School Board had was the fact that parents, if they are well informed, if they're given the information, if schools reach out to them, if the board reaches out to them, they would respond. I agree completely with Jane. I sat through I think about 8 of those meetings. Scott attended every single one of them. And we are going to continue to speak out against the fast and loose behaviour of the current government. It's a sad commentary that 6 leading members of the BC party have not once, to my knowledge, mentioned public education. And by the way, public education is the foundation and the backbone of this province. Make no mistake about it. So when you have people running for a leadership contest who fail to mention it, then there's also something sadly missing. Thank you for your support. Thank you for coming here this morning. It's great seeing such a large crowd of people. Thank you.
Thank you, Noel. And our next speaker is Christine Stewart. Christine is, among other things, a parent. She's a teacher at Ben Tech, and I did have to write this down, so I'm going to read this. She's also representative on the Aboriginal Education Enhancement Agreement Implementation Steering Committee. Say that 10 times fast. Welcome, Christine.
Thank you. Can you hear me back there? Is this on? It's on, right? Is it? Well, I just want to say, that, well, first I want to thank Rose Point for acknowledging territory and welcoming us here to be witness today to the events of today that are taking place. I also, want to say that I'm Niska, and I've been here in the city since, I think, 1981. I still call my home my traditional territory up in the Nass Valley, or Lissums. And so I just am honored that you're here, and I want to say thank you to the Coast Salish people for having us today. I also want to thank the organizers at Vancouver, BC, that organized, and Alicia, thank you for moderating for us. It's great. And I appreciate the elected officials from Vancouver to, Jane Bowie, Mike Lombardi, Patty Backus, and Andrea Reimer. And if there's any others that are here that I have missed, my apologies to you. I just want to say welcome. And to the children who are here as well, thank you for being here. I guess, some items I wanted to bring up that are of concern to us. I am a Vancouver secondary teacher, first of all. I've been teaching since probably 1998. 97, I was a student teacher in Vancouver. And prior to that, I was a First Nations school support worker from 94 until about 97. And this is, Aboriginal education has always been a concern to all of us. Aboriginal and allies of Aboriginal students and parents. I also want to say that, it's not new. You look at the RG10 files from Department of Indian Affairs, from Indian day schools, residential schools. We have always been a topic of concern about, how our children are doing. You can see from Indian agent responses in those files. There's lots of dialogue, discourse, and letters that go back and forth between Indian Affairs and the Indian day school administrators of the day. So it's not new. What is, still a challenge for us is, and I'm going to talk about three things. One is targeted funding, which is provincial funding that comes to each school district. Used to be about $960, now it's about $1130. So for every Aboriginal self-identified student that comes to your school, there's a self-identification expectation. At the end of September, numbers go into the ministry, and funding comes back to the school board. And how this 131 funding is what it's called is a challenge. And how it's used and how transparent that is a problem. Aboriginal graduation rates are, yes, a concern. It's not new to us. We've always been concerned about the fact that our students are not graduating. Our children are not. I'm a student I'm from the north. I didn't graduate. I was actually asked to leave school. I went back years later when I lived here. I moved to Vancouver. I was about 17. No fixed address, but I went back to school and got my grade 12. It was hard, long journey, because you have to do it, pretty much on your own. If you don't have the, support from your band or from Department of Indian Affairs. And my own son, I have two children. I have a son who's 20 now, who is also, we're Burnaby students, and they were kicked out of, he was kicked out of high school. He went back. He's been involved in a program here at Raycam for youth and music. It's the hip hop program. It's been fabulous. Got to work with the farms out at UBC, which also was really important. And I think these are some things that need to be considered in planning of this school. around how do you engage students, Aboriginal students, and we have to reach them. They don't have to reach us. We have to go to them and find out what they need. It's not about us telling them what they need. And another concern that we have is issues around racism, and both internalized racism and racism that we experience that's both overt and covert, from policies that are in place that say, yeah, we offer First Nations Studies 12, and yes, we offer First Peoples English 12, but it's choices that are being made at the school or at any level saying that we're not going to run this because it conflicts with English 12 or it conflicts with Socials 11. So it really is, we need champions of, we do have them for teachers who do try to get this run, but it's not happening. And I think that that's something that this school would potentially, I'm certain, will offer. This past year, 2 years, I was at Britannia for a couple of years, and there was a math program that was being run there, which is amazing. It's not run anymore, but it was an amazing program where Aboriginal students were participating in a program, going to school, and they were finished, and they were in principles math, not essentials math, and I have nothing against that. It's if you're going to graduate from high school, and if essentials math is going to get you that ticket, you can go back to adult ed and get your grade 12 principles math. That's fine too. I just want to go back to my son and daughter. I just want to go back to what happened to them. My daughter is autistic. She's in a Burnaby High School right now. She has special needs and gets some funding there. It's not consistent, the support. And I think when the government put forward block funding where it goes to the district and parents and school people have to fight over this funding, I don't think it's changed. And schools have to fight for this. It's really a challenge because the parents and students who need the most help aren't getting it. And they're being told that, well, if you take it from this student or this school, it means that you're taking it from them to give to your son or your daughter. And it puts parents in a really terrible position to divide and conquer when we should be working together. And with students and parents and allies of special needs, parents who have special needs children. I also, I know I feel like I'm kind of all over here, but the target funding, racism, and special needs are areas that desperately need some support. Enhancement agreements. I want to talk a little bit about that before I turn it back over to Alicia, but the enhancement agreements that are taking place, I had worked at the BC Teachers Federation as a admin officer for about 4 years, and this was a real hard one because the ministry was the first generation of these agreements were not called enhancement agreements. They were called, I believe, improvement agreements, and there were only 3 or 4 across the district, across the province that were happening. And we were told that they were not going to replace local education agreements, which is with the sovereign people in that district. But that was not the intention of the ministry. We found in the second generation, we were told by the ministry officials that these enhancement agreements, if local traditional people were having issues with what was going on between the district and their nation with their students, that they were being told to go to the local education agreement people. And it slowly has become and morphed into this more of a provincial look when it should be tied to the traditional peoples when they're involved with local education agreements. And the enhancement agreements also, in around near the second generation, we found out through BC Teachers that that local presidents were not invited. They were not part of the official signing. Burnaby has done a tremendous job in having an open door, so it doesn't matter who you are, where you are, you can come to these meetings. And they've signed their agreement last year. Vancouver, also has had huge stakeholder participation in their agreement as well. But it has not always been an open door for teachers or their representatives to be there. We were told by Ministry of Education, Enhancement Branch, well, we have teachers who are here, but they're not elected or appointed by their teacher union to be there. And it's really We're a very democratic organization, both our provincial union and our local union, where we